It's easy to feel jealous of celebrities when we consider all of the fame and fortune they've found, but before they became famous, these 10 people were living lives that nobody would envy. We'll introduce you to 10 people whose lives took a dramatic shift into stardom. If you can't be rich and famous, learning about celebs is the next best thing. Stay up to date by clicking subscribe and turning on notifications. Lorna Tucker. When it comes to modeling, some people work hard trying to get their big break, while others are lucky enough to be randomly discovered. You've probably heard stories about people being approached by modeling agents at malls, but not when begging for money to buy drugs. Well, that's exactly what happened to Lorna Tucker, who had been homeless since she was 15 years old. For 2 years, she lived on the street, battling an addiction to heroin. When she was 17, she was panhandling at a bus station when she was discovered. A couple of weeks later, she was working with top photographers in Paris and Milan and was well on her way to turning her life around. Now in her 30s, Tucker is more interested in being behind the camera as she works as a documentary writer, producer, and director. Some of her recent works include AMA, which is a documentary about abuses suffered by Native women in the United States, and Westwood, which covers the life of Vivienne Westwood. Although she's no longer sleeping rough, Tucker hasn't forgotten that dark period of her life. She regularly volunteers for a helpline set up to assist the homeless. Jennifer Lopez. Despite being known for having a lavish lifestyle now, there was a time when Jenny from the block was actually living out on the block. It's estimated that Jennifer Lopez has a net worth of about $250 million, but during her teenage years, she found herself homeless for a period of time. Like most mothers, Guadalupe Rodriguez had grand aspirations for her daughter, which included going to college. J-Lo, on the other hand, wanted to pursue a dancing career full-time. We can't say we blame Rodriguez for encouraging her daughter to pursue a safer life plan, but we are certainly glad that Lopez was determined to be a star. When she was 18 years old, she had nowhere to call her home and would spend nights curled up on the sofa in her dance studio. Fortunately, she wasn't down for long, and within a few months she scored her first dancing gig in Europe. She eventually moved to Los Angeles, but it took her a while to get used to it since it was a stark contrast to the time she spent in the Bronx, New York. Lopez credits the city with giving her the strength she needed to succeed. Halle Berry. Halle Berry is an incredible Oscar-winning actress who also spent some time on the streets of New York. When she first arrived in New York City, Berry was overwhelmed and reliant on some money she had saved up from a recent modeling gig. However, that money didn't last long, and a mere 3 months later, she found herself penniless. She reached out to her mother for help but was turned down, an event which caused a year-long rift between mother and daughter. Although she was angry and resentful at the time, Berry now claims that she appreciates her mother's tough love. Letting your daughter stay in a homeless shelter is certainly tough, but it ended up working out for Berry. She believes that being homeless taught her that she can withstand any situation, and she learned how to take care of herself and live within her means. Eventually, Berry managed to land a waitressing job which kept her afloat until she could get work as an actress. Chris Pratt. If you thought actor Chris Pratt's transformation from the chubby and lovable Andy Dwyer on Parks and Recreation to Star-Lord from Guardians of the Galaxy was impressive, that's nothing compared to his off-screen past. Being homeless is a terrible thing, but at least Pratt was in beautiful Hawaii at the time instead of the streets of New York. While working as a waiter, Pratt lived in a van emblazoned with a picture of Shaggy and Scooby-Doo, which is definitely not what we would picture a Guardian of the Galaxy driving. He was waiting for his big acting break and admits that Maui was a pretty awesome place to be homeless. Pratt waited tables for years, working just enough hours to buy gas, food, alcohol, and fishing supplies. He describes this period of his life as charming, and it was definitely a far cry from his now estimated $30 million net worth. Eventually, he was discovered by actress Rae Dawn Chong, who cast him in her short horror film Cursed Part 3. This meant moving to Los Angeles, and since he left his van behind, Pratt kept acting to avoid being back out on the streets. Frank O'Day. Frank O'Day went from someone who was desperately seeking a second chance to someone who was co-founding the Canadian coffee chain Second Cup. Many homeless people ask for enough change to get a cup of coffee, but O'Day started his own coffee shop. He struggled with alcoholism at an early age, and that led to him living on the street. For years, he spent the money he earned panhandling on booze until one day he decided to give it up for good. Recovering from his alcohol addiction was a great first step, but he had to find a job with no phone, no job history, and no address. One day, he had a lucky break when someone was impressed with his ambition and thought that he would make a good salesman. For some time, he sold construction equipment and eventually met Tom Culligan, who would help him found Second Cup, the largest specialty coffee chain in Canada. Although he eventually sold his part of the business, he uses his inspiring story to deliver inspirational speeches to others going through rough times. He also spends time working on other business opportunities and establishing and funding other charitable organizations. Let's see how well you know the rich and famous with our trivia question. Which famous actor ended up homeless at the age of 12 when his father lost his job and was forced to live in a van? We'll tell you at the end of this video. Jewel. Singer and songwriter Jewel also knows how difficult it is to find gainful employment while homeless. After fleeing an abusive father at age 15, she found herself living in a California apartment. Her employer at the time came on to her, and rebuffing his advances cost Jewel her job and her apartment. After that, she was forced to live in her car while she struggled to find work without having a physical address. In addition to the logistical problems that come with being homeless, she also struggled with how demeaning it was. She claimed that people treated her as if she was contagious when they found out that she was homeless, and it took a toll on her self-esteem. At one point, she drove to the hospital due to a serious health problem but couldn't be seen by a doctor because of her lack of insurance. She claimed that she thought that night in the hospital parking lot was going to be her last. Jewel threw herself into her work, writing poetry and songs and performing them at local venues. Eventually, this would lead to her being discovered and selling 30 million albums. To pay her good fortune forward, Jewel founded a nonprofit organization called Never Broken that teaches people how to find success in life. She also narrated a documentary entitled Our Journey Home, which tells 3 stories about people who went through a period of homelessness. Sylvester Stallone. It turns out that the movie Rocky is more of an underdog story than we realized. At one time, actor Sylvester Stallone was struggling, and after selling everything he had of value, he ended up homeless. He didn't have a home, but he wasn't all by himself. He had the company of his wife and his dog Butkus, an English Mastiff. One day, out of desperation, Stallone did the unthinkable. He sold his dog. Stallone later explained that he had no money to feed himself and his wife, let alone Butkus, so he sold his faithful friend for $50 to a man outside of a liquor store. After that, he wrote the script for Rocky and sold it to a studio with the caveat that he got to star in the film. With cash in hand, Stallone returned to the liquor store and waited around for days to find the man who now owned Butkus. He found him, but the man claimed that his kids were now attached to the dog and demanded a higher price. Stallone claims that it cost him $3,000 to get his beloved Butkus back, and Stallone put him to work appearing in the first 2 Rocky movies. Drew Carey. There was a dark period of time in actor and comedian Drew Carey's life that was no laughing matter. Las Vegas can be a hard place to catch a break, and luck there can be fickle. A young Drew Carey found himself homeless and scouring the streets for spare change so that he could afford something to eat. His father had died when he was only 8 years old, and as a teenager he struggled with severe depression. He journeyed to California in order to reunite with his brother, but ran out of funds in Vegas and ended up stranded with nowhere to live and not enough to eat. In addition to searching for loose change, he also made money by donating plasma for $40 a pop. When he did manage to get his hands on some money, he used it to feed his vice. No, not drugs or alcohol, but boxed macaroni and cheese. He couldn't afford butter or milk, and as a result, the mac and cheese was subpar. With all of the success he found later in life, Carey claims that he now splurges on the deluxe boxes of mac and cheese, and that it makes him feel like a big shot. Suze Orman. She's one of the world's most well-known financial gurus, so it might shock you to know that Suze Orman once didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. Before she had a $35 million empire and her own talk show, The Suze Orman Show, she was born into a regular working-class family in Chicago. Eventually, she and some friends decided to drive to California in Orman's van and ended up working for a tree clearing service and living out of the van. After a couple of months clearing trees out of the road, Orman scored a job as a waitress, though she still couldn't afford to live anywhere but her van. She began to dream of opening her own restaurant, and some of her regulars pulled together $50,000 to make that dream a reality. Unfortunately, that money was subsequently invested and lost due to a shady stockbroker. Losing that huge amount of money was a huge wake-up call for Orman, who realized she needed to be more financially responsible. She eventually ended up working as a stockbroker herself, gaining knowledge of the financial industry and finally moving out of her van. Shania Twain. Although Shania Twain is famous and has amassed a ton of money, her life hasn't been without serious heartache. For many years, she simply declined to speak about her past experiences, but recently she has opened up about it. Twain said she feels detached from that miserable period in her life when she was struggling. Her stepfather was physically abusive to both Twain and her mother, and at times the two women feared for their lives. The family struggled to stay afloat, but Twain was too embarrassed by her family's poverty to ask for help. For a period of time, Twain's mother fled her abuser along with her children, and they ended up bouncing around to various homeless shelters. Twain began singing at bars to contribute to the household income. Despite hating the environment of bars, she loved having the chance to perform her music, and it helped develop her talents. Eventually, her talents were noticed by a local DJ who wrote about her. DJ Stan Campbell hired her to perform backup vocals for an album, and thus her musical career began. She went from spending nights fearing for her life in a homeless shelter to enjoying a net worth of about $370 million. Which famous actor was homeless at the age of 12 when his father lost his job? That would be Jim Carrey. Carrey describes that period of his life as a traumatic kick in the guts, and we can't say we blame him. Maybe the next time you're walking down the street, you'll take the time to fish out some spare change for the person standing on the street corner. You never know how big of a star they could be someday. To learn more about your favorite celebs, be sure to subscribe to The Richest for more videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.